mountain the people will arrive at later on. And so before Moses even begins the process of the Exodus, even is aware that this Exodus is going to happen, he's already been on 2 mini Exoduses already. God has been preparing Moses for what is about to come, hints of the story that is about to play out on a massive scale. And that process of preparing Moses, this person who's going to lead this Exodus, is what we're going to see in our passage tonight. God is preparing Moses through God revealing himself to Moses. God is preparing Moses in our passage through God revealing himself to Moses. So with that, let's walk through our passage. Chapter 3 of Exodus. Moses, he's in the wilderness. We find that he's taken a wife. He's part of this family. He's got Jethro, we see, his father-in-law, and he's taken on the family business. He's a shepherd of all things, and he's looking after his flock. And we comes to Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb, it's the same mountain as Mount Sinai. It's given a different name as we go later on in Exodus. And God appears to Moses through this burning bush. And as we look through our passage, you can kind of break down what's written here in chapter 3 into 3 statements, 3 kind of expressions of identity that come out. First one is, "Here I am," Moses says. Then Moses says, "Who am I?" And then God says, "I am who I am." Here I am. Who am I? I am who I am. It's kind of a bit catchy if you've been reading it through hundreds of times this week. And God calls Moses from the burning bush, and Moses says, the first statement, "Here I am." But before Moses is allowed to do anything else, verse 5, look with me, God tells Moses not to take another step and to take off his footwear, because where he is standing is holy ground. And God says to Moses, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." That's an interesting reference, isn't it? It goes back to what we looked at last week. The foundational promises that frame Exodus for us. These promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Promises that the people will grow and grow and grow. Promise that God's people will end up in God's place. Promises that God's people will end up in God's place under God's rule. Promise that God's people will end up in God's place under God's rule and with his blessing. That's what it points us to. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And look down at verse 7 to 10. What does God say he's about to do? Verse 7 to 10, he's going to bring his people to his place, under his rule, and with his blessing. And God repeats that same promise in verses 16 to 22. This is what God says he's going to do. The Israelites are going to follow the same pattern that Moses has just done. The Egyptians are going to be struck down. The Israelites are going to leave Egypt. They're going to go through the waters. They're going to come to the wilderness, and they're going to end up by this mountain that Moses is at, and then on to the promised land. And God says to Moses, verse 10, "I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." So God has told Moses what is about to happen, and God says to Moses, "You're the man who's going to see it through. You're going to lead my people out of slavery." Now, reading through a passage like this, you begin to ask a couple of questions, don't you? Like, why does it have to be like this? If God wants to get Moses' attention, why does he bring him all the way to the wilderness by this mountain and do it with a burning bush in kind of seemingly quite peculiar ways? Well, it's like, if I can use, Exodus is laying for us a golf tee, laying a foundation of what's about to come later. And when we read in Exodus chapter 3 themes like wilderness, mountain, fire, holy, don't come near, it actually takes us further on the story in Exodus. It points us forward. And if you look at Exodus chapter 19, where the Exodus has just happened. God's people, spoiler alert, are rescued out of Egypt. They come to the same mountain where Moses is at as chapter 3. We see that God again tells his people not to come near, because where they are at is holy ground. In fact, God's people, when they reach this same mountain in Exodus 19, are told they can't touch the mountain because God descends on it in fire, not on a bush, a whole mountain ablaze. And again in Exodus chapter 19, further on, we see that people have to hide their faces because of what they've seen. It sounds exactly the same, just on a bigger scale and with more people. And yet both of these points in Exodus both have the same high point. They both have the same high point, in the high point being God revealing his name. So further on in Exodus, after chapter 19, where God's descended on the mountain in fire, the people are told, don't come near. In Exodus chapter 33, God says to Moses, I will cause all of my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name in your presence. And in our passage, when we look at it and we go through, we see that our passage has the exact same high point. What is the crescendo it's all building towards? God revealing his name. Look with me at verse 13, just a verse before. Moses says to the Lord, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask, what is his name? What should I tell them? And then comes the high point. Then comes the center point. Then comes the very core of our passage we're looking at tonight. Verse 14, God says, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And every time we read through our Bibles and we see Lord with a capital L and small caps O-R-D, this is the name that it's referring to. Yahweh, as it's known. I am who I am. This is the name that God will be referred to over 5,000 times throughout the Old Testament. This is the name he wants to be known. As it says, the name forevermore that you shall call me. And it's a name that points us to the eternalness of God. He has always been. There has never been a moment God wasn't. He doesn't need to explain his existence. I am who I am. But that name, I am who I am, it is an explanation of everything we see in chapter 3. And I want to show us why. It explains the burning bush. Why does the fire in the burning bush not consume the bush itself? Why is the fire coming up and it's not consuming the bush itself? Well, because it points us to the self-sufficiency of God. In order for fire to burn, it needs fuel, doesn't it? But God appearing in fire doesn't need fuel. It doesn't need to consume the bush because God says, I am who I am. God doesn't need fuel for existence. He just does. And by not burning the bush, he defies the laws of creation. He defies the laws of physics and of chemistry. And yet, who does Moses meet? The one who says to him, I am who I am. The one who created all things. The one who exists outside of all the laws that he made. And therefore, I am can work miracles that are outside of creation's laws. Just like he's going to do in just a few chapters' time as he performs wonders and miracles and plagues that are going to come on Egypt. It explains why Moses in chapter 3 was told not to take a step further towards the Lord, because he was approaching I am. He is set apart from everything else. Or as we would say, he's holy. It's all been building up in chapter 3 like a piece of classical music. It's been building and building and building and building and building and building, and we reach the crescendo where God reveals himself, I am who I am. That is the center, that is the core of our passage tonight and what that glorious name means. Now we're going to pause and we're going to get around our tables now and we're going to ask this question, which is, hopefully should come up on the screen, which is, how would you have expected God to reveal himself? Does anything surprise you with this encounter? So there we go. We've got a short break. We're going to gather around our tables, and in a few moments' time, we'll come back and we'll look at what this means for us. Well, we'll give it one more minute around our tables, one more minute, and then we'll come back. Well, there we go. We want to draw our discussions to a close. We'll come back and move on to our second half. Hopefully we've had helpful conversation, furthering what we've just looked at in Exodus chapter 3. Now, I'm sure we're wondering, what's the point? What's the point of all of this? What does this mean? Well, we should know that this is a passage that's not about Moses. It's about Yahweh. I am. We might say this evening, well, that's obvious, Dan. But you see, that's the point. Yahweh is giving Moses a God-centered perspective of life. God, in revealing himself to Moses like this, is saying that at the center of everything, the reason for everything, behind everything, is me. I am. That is a massive, perspective-altering revelation. There's a guy called Matthew Henry, and he puts it this way. He says, the greatest and the best man in the world must say, by the grace of God, I am what I am. But God says absolutely, more than any creature, man or angel can ever say, I am that I am. You know, almost from the beginning of human history, the dominant thought of our solar system was that the earth was at the center of the universe and that the sun and everything else revolved around it. People like Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, thought so and said so. Other famous historical scientists said that it was the same. And we make gods for ourselves, and we give names to those gods. And these gods aren't offensive to us. They tell us what we want to hear, not what we need to hear. These are gods that have been made and do not make things. And with all the good intentions in our hearts, we are always going to want to worship gods like that. Gods that revolve around us and that we meet on our own terms. I tell you, young people, that is the challenge that is so often the biggest challenge that we have to face. And if we're looking for a quick test to see what order our universe is in, we'll answer these questions. Does the God we worship ever challenge us? Does the God we worship ever confront us? Or does the God we worship just happen to agree with everything that we believe in and the way we want to go? If so, we know who's at the center and what everything else is revolving around. And yet life like that, having gods like that, they're no gods at all, are they? We like it, it's comfortable, but they can't say what we see in Exodus 3. They can't say, I am who I am. Because when we encounter God who says, I am who I am, suddenly our perspective of what life revolves around has to change. It's confronted. And yet as we sit here this evening, you know, maybe as we talk about encountering Yahweh, we see the burning bush, we talk about meeting and having this God at the center of everything, and it all feels so far removed. We might wonder this evening, how are we supposed to encounter and meet with and know this I am God? Well, you know, fast forward a few thousand years, and in John chapter 8:58, we meet a man from Nazareth, Jesus. And he begins to talk to crowds about who he is. And in John 8:58, Jesus says to these crowds, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. That's what Jesus says. Before Abraham was born, I am. Jesus, without hesitation, unmistakably takes this sacred, holy name of Yahweh, I am who I am, and says, He is I am, taken on flesh. And in light of everything that we've looked at tonight in Exodus chapter 3, I hope we see what a monumental statement that is. So, side note, when people say that Jesus just claimed to be a good teacher, that is not all he claimed to be. He claims to be I am, Yahweh, God of Exodus, God of the burning bush, the God of creation, standing right in front of them. And tonight, Yahweh has revealed himself, not in a burning bush, not on top of a mountain, but in a glorious person. And that person can be encountered. And that person can be met with. That person can be enjoyed. That person can be known today. And get this, it just gets better. Jesus, who is I am, has come to bring us near. You know, we've looked this evening at Exodus chapter 3, and when Moses meets the I am God, what is he told to do? Don't take a step further. And yet this I am, Jesus, he comes so that you and I might be brought near. So that actually he might not have to say, stop where you are when we come to him, but he might say, come near. You can step forward. And when we look at Jesus, the great I am, we see what the universe revolves around, what we are meant to revolve around. I am who I am. And what does that mean? Well, ultimately, it means that in Christ, we have someone who is worthy of our praise. We have someone who is worthy of giving our lives to follow. Do you know, going through life, I'm convinced of this. Maybe those who have lived more years can even testify this greater still. Going through life, most of the stuff that we give our hearts to, that we give our time to, that we give our lives to in some way, it just is not worthy of it. It just isn't worthy of it. Maybe you resonate with that this evening. You know that the time that we give our hearts, we give our adoration, we give our worship, we give our money, we give our time to, it's just not worthy of it. It can't handle our praise and our worship. And so often we find that these things are empty and they're hollow and they're broken and they're powerless to sort out anything that we desperately need and we long for. And this is why when we look at Exodus chapter 3 and we meet a God who says, I am who I am, well, we don't need to look anywhere else for something that is worthy of our praise. Do we want to worship someone that will always be worthy of your praise? Want to worship someone who won't be crushed by the weight of your expectation? Want to worship someone who makes all things and is not made themselves? Want to worship someone powerful enough to keep their promises? Want to worship someone who actually has the answers about why we are here? Want to worship someone who knows you better than anyone else, knowing even your flaws and your failures, and yet still loves you more than anyone in this world? Want to worship someone who doesn't shovel burdens on you to carry, but instead carries a cross that you were made to carry? Want to give your life to someone who won't let it be wasted? Exodus chapter 3 shows us, let I am be the center of your universe. Revolve everything around him. He is worthy. Well, we're going to gather round into our tables again for some discussion. Some questions are going to come up on the screen. And afterwards, we'll draw our time in this part looking at God's word to a close in prayer. And then James will lead the rest of our service. So why don't we gather together in our tables again and look at these questions for a few moments' time.
Gadget time. Okay.
What would it look like for God to revolve around us? I think that's, I think that's the real one. Speaking personally. Well, we'd all make decisions that suit what we think is right, and actually, immediately by doing that, we do someone who we don't know about a disservice because we don't know the big picture. So even if they were good things, like you were saying, even if they were good choices and they were kind choices, they still have an impact somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, but also, even if we did really bad things, we could justify them that way too.
Yeah, like Phil was saying this morning, kind of self-righteousness says my rules, so therefore I'm by definition right.
Absolutely, yeah. Because God revolves around me. Therefore, what I've said is right, and you must conform to that.
Yeah, it's what my kids fell into doing, which is treating God like some kind of intergalactic slot machine. I put my penny in.
Yeah. I asked you for something
Yeah.
and it's a different
Come on, spit out what I want at the bottom. Oh, you're rubbish.
Yeah.
Well, I can deliver what I wanted. So, not going to bother with that anymore. So, yeah. So, and I mean, they had that problem in the Old Testament, didn't they? Verse, I can never remember chapter and verse, where it says, damn you, but it says, every man did what was right in his own eyes. Oh, that went well.
Well, I don't want to break up the conversation. I know we just started, and oh, I know. There we go. Sorry, I know. Hey. Oh dear. And yes, even I was shocked about the amount of questions, and I put them up there. So yeah, next time. But hopefully we're able to pick a few, and hopefully we've had some good conversation. God reveals Himself